Hello, welcome to Zoonosis with Joy. I'm Joy, and today we're going to be talking about gay animals. Happy Pride Month, everybody. This video is about animal homosexuality and the cultural and the societal implications for that. I hope you enjoy. Animal homosexuality is incredibly widespread. Hundreds and hundreds of species and counting have this kind of behavior, and this isn't just even counting animals that are hermaphroditic or reproduce asexually. Sometimes these are behaviors where animals are engaging in same-sex behavior due to just casual sexual interactions or convenience. Sometimes it could be due to hormonal sort of influences, such as heifers when they mount other female heifers during their estrus period. You can also have it as a method of social bonding and social cohesion. Bonobos will do this, male bonobos and male bonobos, or female bonobos and female bonobos, as a form of conflict resolution, will rub each other's genitals. If only other species were so enlightened, I guess. I don't know. They're one of our closest animal relatives, but we also see animals that are strictly homosexual in some species, so such as wild bovids, wild caprines, so wild cattle-like animals, and wild sheep and goat-like animals. So we see in our domestic bulls and our domestic goats that some of these animals are what we call duds, which is kind of a homophobic term, content warning for homophobia in this video, basically they don't breed female animals, they only breed male animals. And this becomes an economic problem. You see, in fact, it has come such an economic problem that they have a mating test that they do with some of these animals during sales, where they have the male presented with a female and seeing if he wants to mount and breed her. There's a lot to unpack with that, but moving on. You also have animals that form lifelong bonds with members of the same sex. This is probably as close as we get to orientations in animals, and I'll talk about that in a second. But bottlenose dolphins will form years-long pair bonds with members of their own sex. So male bottlenose dolphins are kind of famous for this. The gay dolphins, all right? Live with it. So orientations in animals is kind of a tricky topic. There's been some number of criticisms of the idea. Animals can't necessarily identify as anything. They don't identify as straight. They don't identify as gay. They don't identify as lesbian. They don't identify as bisexual because they don't have a sense of identity that human beings have. Valid point. It is pretty gay though if you have penguins that are mating with penguins of the same sex, raising families together. That's incredibly gay. I don't know what else you call it. I guess you can call it homosexual. It sounds very clinical. Whatever. Moving on. So that is to say that homosexual behavior in animals is extremely common and widespread. Now, when it comes to how human beings have understood it, it gets kind of dicey, and here's the homophobia part of it. So in the ancient and medieval world, there were a lot of people who just plain said it does not exist. I think my favorite example of this is in Ovid in the Metamorphoses, I should say. And there's specifically a line where a female character who burns with love for another woman laments that this does not happen in nature, and that her love is a kind of unnatural sort of thing.
Mares do not burn with the love of mares, or heifers for heifers. The ram inflames the ewe, its hind follows the stag. So birds mate, and among all animals, not one female is attacked by lust for a female. Yeah, right.
So that's a lot to unpack. But we know that Plutarch also had similar ideas about homosexuality in animals. This wasn't universally known about in the ancient world because there weren't any good scientists or naturalists running around. There wasn't a Wikipedia, there wasn't a public library where you could just learn about these things. And there was a lot of naturalistic sort of fallacies about, if it's natural, therefore it's good. And we don't see this in nature, therefore, if it's bad. If it doesn't happen in nature, it's bad. We'll talk a little bit about the naturalistic fallacy in a bit, but some medieval and ancient writers such as Barnabas were saying, well, some animals do this gay thing, and if you do this gay thing, it's depraved, you have to be better than that, You also had medieval bestiaries use animals as moral lessons for human beings and things not to do, so there's that as well. And these cultural ideas in Christianity in the Western world really carried over contemporarily to this day. I don't know if you've noticed, but they're around, right? The 19th century shook things up a bit. So one of the things that happened was that scientists started paying attention to the things that were happening outside. They stopped reading books. Well, they kept reading books, but they started touching grass, so to speak. So one of the things that they noticed was that animals were indeed having sex with members of their own sex. So the first primary example that was noted was, I'm not making this up, the cockchafer beetle. The cockchafer beetle. The cockchafer beetle. So the cockchafer beetle, also known as the May beetle or the May bug, engages in male-male sexual intercourse. I don't understand the mechanics. I don't think I want to, but apparently the male inserts his organ into the male organ of the submissive partner. Wild. Apparently, this shocked and disgusted people and scientists, entomologists in the 19th century, and they rushed to come to conclusions. Keep in mind, this is before Darwin published On the Origin of Species. So some of the ideas are kind of lazy by modern standards. One of them was that, there's just no females around, so they resort to homosexual behavior. It's kind of like the Navy, where you're on a ship full of men, there's no women around, and so you're kind of forced to, Anyway, so that was one of the ideas, which doesn't make sense because there were female cockchafer beetles, around, and the males were still mating with them, but they were also mating with each other. Well, explanation number 2 was that this is a case of mistaken identity. I guess this must have happened a lot in the 19th century, where you would go up to a bloke, pat him on the rump and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were a lady," and they would go their separate ways. Now, keep in mind, the cockchafer beetle has giant antennae that look like antlers sticking off of it. The females have just little nubs. And the way that males identify females is by pheromonal smell using their giant antlers. The males know what males smell like. They are going after males because they smell like males. And that's what they wanted at the moment. Oh, shocking. Third explanation was that this is a dominance display. You see, the dominant one, the one on top, was making the submissive one submissive, and that it would cause them to have more mating success with the female beetles. Not only has this never been identified in the cockchafer, this is baloney. I don't understand why the top one is the one that's dominant and the bottom one isn't, but make of that what you will. There was also the penguins. The penguins, as we mentioned, engage in these kind of lifelong pair bonds, or these kind of interseasonal pair bonds. They form nice little gay little families where 2 male penguins will meet up. They will mate with each other. I'm not demonstrating that. And they will raise a little family. They'll make a little nest. They'll steal eggs. There's kidnapping involved. And they raise a family together. How sweet. But this shocked people, Victorian scientists in the 19th century. In fact, some of them would explicitly omit this from their books and the published findings, because this was not something that women and men living in civilized society needed to know about. It was unseemly. But the explanations for this were kind of wild, like, hey, there's just no females around again. The other one was that mistaken identity. I guess that's more applicable in penguins because males and females look very similar. But, if you look at penguins, most of the matings are male-female, and male-male are the minority, so at least some of the time they're getting it right. So why are they choosing other males? And then you have the explanation that, testosterone and luteinizing hormone is higher in penguins that are mating with other male penguins, because you see they're really, horny, beaked up. They're going after other male penguins and forming mating relationships that way. This is all ignoring the vastly more likely possibility that they desired this, or that they were finding these interactions pleasurable. But moving on, the other major thing that happened in the 19th century was that a bloke by the name of Charles Darwin comes up with this theory of natural selection, as well as the theory of sexual selection, that makes heterosexual reproductive sex the primary object of life on Earth. That means that homosexual sex is now the abnormal thing outside of Darwin's theory. Psychologists rush to find explanations, and they find schizophrenia as one of the major ones. They thought that, if you had these kind of perversions, there must be something wrong in here. Or maybe if you had those kind of perversions, you were some sort of alcoholic or some sort of other, someone who had something not right up here, basically. And this theory persisted until about the 1950s and 60s. And even then, there were still hangers-on for, most of the 20th century that said, yeah, no, homosexuality is a mental problem, you see. Now, in the 1940s, another bloke comes along. His name was Alfred Kinsey. Alfred Kinsey was an entomologist. Entomology is the study of insects. What is he doing talking about animal homosexuality? Well, his contribution to the field was that he rediscovered human homosexuality, thing that was apparently a psychological disorder, and he brings it back to the realm of the normal. So he was studying wasps for a lot of his professional career, and when his university told him that he had to teach a sex education course, he was shocked to find that he had more literature about wasp sex than he did about human sex. So, identifying this gap in the field, he went out of his way to do a survey, a field survey, kind of like you do with insects, about human sexual behavior. And this becomes a landmark study. And one of his major findings was that homosexuality, bisexuality, asexuality are a lot more common than have been previously supposed. And this means that human sexual behavior is a lot more diverse than was supposed in the early 20th century, that they weren't necessarily perversions or mental disorders, but parts of the normal, natural human whole. And this became the search for the biological underpinnings of sexual behavior. This became a search that was prompted by psychologists and neurologists, geneticists, to look for the gay gene, the gay part of the brain, the gay psychological function. Where does that come from? Why do we have sexual orientation? Why do we engage in these behaviors? And animals were referred to as a model. The problem with animals is that we can't ask them, why are you going after members of your own sex? So they ended up looking at a lot of different things, such as hormonal levels, brain development, ontogeny, and it turns out, a lot of these things happen very early on in life, and that environmental exposure to hormones can really change the trajectory of things. So, for instance, rats, if you remove their access to testosterone as they are going through, development and puberty, and then inject them with estrogen, they will start developing female-specific sexual behaviors. Aha, maybe it's hormonal. Well, it doesn't work if you do it with females. If you remove their estrogen and you don't give them any hormones, they still stay female. So there's still some things that are kind of more, the sexual template is female, not male. Male comes second. So all this to say is that in the 1990s, they find the gay area of the brain. It's a lot more complicated than that. They also find genes, the gay genes. It's a lot more complicated than that. But they find natural explanations for things that people have been doing for literal millennia, and it helps explain, something that seems scary, confusing, and potentially dangerous to society. Now, a lot of what I'm talking about is the process of trying to understand natural law. Natural law is the idea that nature has certain things that are good and natural and are brought to us by gods or God, right? So if it's part of nature, it must be part of the divine and therefore partly, good. So if homosexuality is part of that, then it must be good, and therefore we should make it part of our laws, right? Like, don't eat your infants. I guess that's one of them. There must be other ones too, but don't murder your family, kind of thing, right? And homosexuality, now that we know it's part of nature, therefore it must be a good thing. And this is the argument that gets put down into the laws that help strike down sodomy laws in the United States. Most famously with Lawrence v. Texas in 2003. 2003, that was 21 years ago. So this law specifically cites Animal homosexual behavior exists, and that should make us think maybe this isn't such an unnatural thing after all. Now, the criticism of this is pretty obvious if you have, if you thought about it for more than 2 seconds. It's a naturalistic fallacy, right? What's natural is not necessarily what's good. Rabies is natural, so is cancer, so is prion disease. What about homosexuality? Is it anything like those? Well, then you have to come up with harms, and what harm is there when you have 2 consenting adults doing things in the privacy of their own home, living a relationship, being active members of society, paying their taxes? Who cares, right? If you give them the opportunity to form marriages and be active members of the military, that kind of thing, right? We're talking about politics again, right? So if you find that there is a natural case to be made that is part of nature, you could just say, well, it's nature, and you can't change nature, and maybe we should just accept it. Okay, well, at least it gets us to the point where we are abolishing sodomy laws and we're legalizing gay marriage and gay participation in society. Hooray. Whatever. There's also an argument to be made that if we're looking for the orientation of people based on biological grounds, then it's more unimpeachable, right? You can't, if someone is just like, okay, well, I like having sex with members of my own sex, right? Then, it's like, okay, well, can you stop? There's that argument to be made. Versus people who are saying, well, I only like doing this, I don't like doing that, I've been this way since I've been a kid, all my life. And they say, oh, okay, well, I guess we can't say no to that. You have to find some biological explanation. You have to look to animals, you have to look to their neurology, you have to look to their genetics or their hormones or whatever, their ontogeny, which is development. And there's problems with us too, right? Just because someone developed that way doesn't mean what they're doing is right or good. There are a lot of aberrant sexual practices that are form, and orientations, you could say, that form very early on in life that could be harmful to society. So maybe instead of looking towards these biological explanations, we should be looking towards what's the harm, what's the benefit, right? Maybe you should stop being discriminating against people, because there's also an argument to be made from nature that homophobia doesn't exist in any other animal other than human beings. That's pretty thoughtful. So I talked a little bit about homosexuality in animals, a little bit about its history and its political ramifications to this day. All that to say is that, you can be gay, you can be an animal, who cares? It's a normal part of life, and if you have a problem with it, go jump in a lake. All right, well, that's all I have for today. Leave any comments in the comment section below. I am the tyrant, so I will delete hateful, nasty, bigoted comments, and I will see you next time. Peace.